A man walks to work one morning in the snow. He is arguably the most powerful person in Japan, second only to an emperor who has no real power and a shogun who lets others make decisions for him. He commands armies, he signs treaties, he has sent men to their deaths for disagreeing with him. And on this particular morning, in March of 1860, 18 men are waiting outside the castle gate to kill him. Here is the part that should make you pause. He probably knew something like this was coming. His advisors had warned him. His enemies had been open about their intentions. The threat was not a secret. He came anyway. The question is not who killed Ii Naosuke. History recorded that in detail. The real question is why a man that powerful made himself that vulnerable, and what it tells us about what power actually does to people who hold it too long. Japan in the mid-1800s was a country that had spent 2 centuries pretending the outside world did not exist. Not metaphorically, legally. Foreign ships were turned away. Japanese citizens who traveled abroad could be executed upon return. The country had sealed itself inside an ideology, and for a while, it worked. Then, American warships appeared in the harbor. In 1853, Commodore Matthew Perry arrived with what were diplomatically called steam frigates, which the Japanese called black ships, and which were, in practical terms, a polite ultimatum delivered at gunpoint. Open your ports for trade or find out what happens next. Japan had no comparable navy, no comparable cannons. The Tokugawa shogunate, which had governed Japan with extraordinary stability for over 200 years, suddenly found itself face to face with a world that had not been standing still while Japan was busy ignoring it.
This is the moment when political systems reveal their character. Some adapt, some fracture. The Tokugawa did both, simultaneously, and that combination proved fatal.
The debate that erupted was not simply should we trade with foreigners. It was a proxy war for every buried tension in Japanese society, about imperial authority, about the samurai class's fading relevance, about who actually ruled and by what right. Into this particular fire walked Ii Naosuke. Ii Naosuke was born in 1815 as the 14th son of a feudal lord, the 14th. In a society built on inheritance, being the 14th son of anything is essentially a decorative position. He was trained for a life of cultured obscurity, tea ceremony, poetry, Zen Buddhism. He became genuinely skilled at these things, which suggests he was a man of real interior life, not merely ambition dressed in silk. He did not expect power, which is sometimes exactly how people end up with too much of it. Through a series of deaths, political accidents, and the kind of aristocratic reshuffling that tends to produce either great men or disasters, Ii eventually became lord of the Hakone domain, one of the most prestigious fiefs in Japan. And then, in 1858, he was appointed Tairo, the shogunate's chief minister, the highest office a non-Tokugawa could hold. He was, by this point, a man who had spent years watching a government drift without a rudder. He was intelligent enough to diagnose the problem and confident enough to believe he was the solution. This combination is, historically speaking, among the more dangerous traits a person in power can possess. He was not cruel for cruelty's sake, but he had arrived at a conclusion that Japan's survival required compromise with the West, that compromise required speed, and that speed required silencing opposition. He had decided, with the calm certainty of a man who has meditated too long on difficult questions, that he was right, and that being right was sufficient justification. History has a long and consistent file on men who believe this. In 1858, Ii Naosuke signed the Harris Treaty with the United States, a commercial agreement opening Japanese ports to American trade. He did not obtain imperial approval first. This was not an oversight. The emperor's court in Kyoto had been signaling opposition, and Ii had calculated that waiting for approval was a luxury Japan could not afford. He was probably correct about the strategic necessity. He was catastrophically wrong about what the political cost would be. The imperial loyalists, the Sono Joy faction, meaning roughly, revere the emperor, expel the barbarians, erupted. To them, Ii had not merely made a policy decision. He had committed a kind of national sacrilege, bypassing the divine authority of the emperor to hand Japan's sovereignty to foreign merchants.
Ii's response was the Ansei Purge.
Over the following year, he arrested, exiled, and in some cases executed dozens of critics, samurai, scholars, political rivals, and men whose only offense was having voiced disagreement at an inconvenient moment. Over 100 people were punished. Among the executed was Yoshida Shoin, a young intellectual whose ideas about restoring imperial power would, ironically, outlive everyone involved in this conflict and eventually dismantle the very shogunate he was trying to save. If you enjoy watching powerful men inadvertently plant the seeds of their own downfall, you are watching the right channel. Consider subscribing. The Purge did what purges always do. It silenced some critics, radicalized the rest, and convinced a small group of men that conventional opposition was no longer an option. Among the samurai of the Mito domain, whose Lord Ii had placed under house arrest, a faction began to meet in secret. They were not professional assassins. They were idealists, which in many ways is far more dangerous. Their reasoning had the brutal simplicity of men who have convinced themselves that history has appointed them. Ii Naosuke was a traitor to Japan. He had defied the emperor, enabled the foreigners, and murdered patriots. He was a cancer, therefore, surgery. The decision crystallized over months. 18 men, a snow-covered gate, a morning in March. They did not expect to survive. This is important. Men who accept their own death in advance are, operationally speaking, very difficult to stop. The morning of the attack, Naosuke's palanquin approached the Sakuradaman gate of Edo Castle, his daily route, his daily routine. A light snow was falling, which had the practical effect of encouraging the guards to cover their muskets, keeping the powder dry. Small decisions, large consequences. The Mito samurai were already waiting, disguised among the foot traffic. One man approached the palanquin, presenting what appeared to be a petition, a conventional gesture that protocol required be acknowledged. In the moment of hesitation, the attack began. The fighting was close, brief, and chaotic. Naosuke's guards were caught unprepared. Most of the assassins had never fought a real battle. Several were killed in the struggle. Naosuke himself was shot, a pistol wound, which meant someone had acquired Western technology for this particular act of anti-Western protest, which is either deeply ironic or entirely on brand for human behavior. He was then beheaded. His head was taken to a nearby shrine and displayed. The killers who survived scattered. Most were eventually captured and executed.
The whole event lasted minutes.
The immediate political effect was nothing. The treaties remained. Japan did not expel the foreigners. The shogunate continued for about 7 more years. What the assassination of Ii Naosuke actually did was remove the one man with the political skill and the will to hold the Tokugawa system together under pressure. His successor was capable. The succession after that, less so. The shogunate began to splinter along the fractures two had been frantically trying to paper over. The Sano Joy movement did not fade. It evolved, shed its more violent fringe, absorbed more sophisticated thinkers, and gradually became the ideological foundation of the Meiji Restoration of 1868, in which the emperor's authority was formally restored and the shogunate that had governed Japan for 2.5 centuries was dissolved. Here is the irony that deserves to be read slowly. Ii Naosuke had signed treaties with Western nations because he believed Japan needed to modernize or be destroyed. The men who killed him did so in the name of restoring traditional Japanese values and expelling foreign influence. The government that emerged from the chaos his death helped accelerate, the Meiji government, embraced Western technology, Western institutions, Western military organization, and Western economic models with a thoroughness that would have satisfied even Commodore Perry.
The assassins won the battle and lost the argument. Ii Naosuke lost his life and in the long run turned out to have been roughly correct.
History distributes its vindications with considerable sadism. There is a recurring pattern in the history of political violence that is worth sitting with. The man with power believes that power gives him the right to make unilateral decisions for everyone below him. The man without power believes that powerlessness gives him the moral authority to remove the powerful by force. Both are certain, both are dangerous, and the society caught between them pays the bill for both certainties. Ii Naosuke understood Japan's geopolitical situation with rare clarity. He also believed that clarity justified the suppression of everyone who disagreed with him. This is not an unusual combination. It is, in fact, the default posture of intelligent authoritarians throughout history, and the reason they tend to produce the very upheavals they are trying to prevent. The 18 men who killed him understood genuine grievance. They had watched their government capitulate, their comrades imprisoned, their emperor ignored. Their anger was not manufactured, but they confused "the cause is just" with "therefore the method is just," which is the logical error that has written more tragedy into the historical record than perhaps any other single mistake. If this pattern looks familiar to you, and it should, consider liking this video. History is free, lessons are optional. Ii Naosuke was given a posthumous pardon in 1860, mere months after his death, when the shogunate, briefly conscious of optics, decided that destroying a man's reputation as well as his body was politically excessive. He has since been reconsidered by Japanese historians as a man ahead of his time, a pragmatist surrounded by ideologues, a statesman whose methods were indefensible and whose instincts were largely correct.
He opened Japan. Japan modernized. Japan became a world power.
He did not live to see any of it. The men who killed him did not live to see most of it. The snow at Sakuradaman fell and was cleared and fell again. Power does not protect the people who hold it. It only delays the moment when the world reminds them that they were never as in control as they believed.